Good morning. My name is Joe. My pronouns are he and him, and I don't use Scotiabank, but I am richer than I think. That is an uncomfortable slogan, eh? It's a little too on the nose most of the time, and today with this parable, we're going to do a deep dive into this parable in a minute. But let me start by saying that Jesus means exactly what you think he means. If you think this parable is saying that the wealthy are in grave danger, that it's better to be poor than to be wealthy, yep, you heard Jesus correctly. We are going to dig more deeply into that today, maybe add a bit of context and some nuance for sure. But please don't let anything I say disavow you or distract you from the clear point of the parable. What is highly valued by people in terms of material things, financial things, what is highly valued by people is deeply offensive to God. That's a direct quote from the previous passage. Christ collides. Boom. The wealth that our society chases and applauds is entirely counter to the way of Jesus. Collision course. Just so you know, I'm as uncomfortable with this topic as you are. Religion and politics and personal finances all in one go. I don't blame you if you don't invite me to join you for lunch today. I did my taxes this week, so I am acutely aware of my financial situation. And those tax brackets, the numbers on the page, they say a whole lot about what we're worth or where we stand in our society. Maybe I am richer than I think, or maybe not. I was going to tell you what income percentile I'm in, but I'm a little too embarrassed to say that directly today. You can decide whether that's because it's too high or too low. But that's another uncomfortable reality this morning. We're not all the same here. We're not all in the same place financially in this room, in our congregation. And we do our best. We try not to let that get in the way of our community. We mean what we say about everyone belonging here. We value all kinds of contributions and participation. We all give and we all receive in this space. Those things are true, and I'm proud of how hard we work at that, how well we share life together across those financial demographics. And it divides us. Some of us have more stability, more opportunities than others. Some of us get to be casual in our generosity. Others we're dependent on that generosity. And there is gratitude for that. There's gratitude here, and there's also discomfort. It feels better to be on the giving end than on the receiving end most of the time. So with this parable, some of us are going to identify with the wealthy person, and some of us are going to identify with Lazarus. The parable points out the gulf that wealth creates between people. And I just want to name that gulf exists right here, not just out there. And I hope that being aware of this existing here among us changes how we listen and how we respond. So, Christ collides with our selfishness. Isn't Lent fun this year? You all started this series a lot closer. The chairs were like right up here, and you've been slowly backing away as we've gone on. Selfishness. I appreciated what you shared, Teresa. I also have a lot of baggage with this word. I was raised with the idea that selfishness is a synonym for sin. And that was expressed in a lot of different ways in my evangelical-leaning Anabaptist community. You do not put your own needs ahead of someone else. Looking out for number one, that's the way of the world. The way of Jesus is to sacrifice, to put your own needs and desires at the bottom, to give those up to serve others. Often quoted scripture was Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, therefore I no longer live, but it is Christ who lives in me. We just sang a version of that. The self needs to die. Stated more positively, and some of you have seen this before, the acronym for joy. Jesus first, then others, and then you. And that's a bit more hopeful. I'm not taking issue with any of this theologically for the most part, but practically, in my experience, this way of thinking about faith saying that selfishness is a synonym for sin. That way of thinking has been damaging to me and to a lot of others for two reasons. One, because it is so often not practiced by the people who preach it the most strongly. So many of the public-facing leaders of the evangelical movement have preached Jesus while becoming quite personally wealthy and powerful. And there are plenty of Christians that don't do this. There are plenty that live lives of sacrifice and service for sure. But across the world, across the board, by my unscientific observation, Christians in the West are not less selfish people than others. And that's a problem for a theology that draws such a stark contrast between the church and the world. If we don't look different, then what are we doing? And then two, on a personal and psychological level, because of this emphasis placed against selfishness, I internalized that wanting things was wrong. Just ask Carrie how much fun we have on road trips when it's time to decide where to eat. Well, I don't know. What do you want? Kids, what do you want to eat? I don't care. Just tell me where you want me to go. That's me. And the truth is, what I really want, and if you ask me honestly, what do you want? I want everyone to be happy and for this not to be a big deal. But I do want something particular to eat. Usually it's pizza, but I will pout a little bit while everyone else is enjoying their burgers. But I'm not going to say anything, and I'm probably not even aware that this is going on. I'm just got this discontent of like, I don't know why I'm so tense about this. All that happens on the inside because I've internalized that wanting things is bad. That's just a silly example, but it's not just me. It really is problematic for me to not know what I want, for me to be afraid of exploring my desires, what is good and what I need, what I want. Self-care, self-esteem, just taking care of myself in general becomes problematic because, I'm supposed to die so that Christ can live in me. I know that's melodramatic, but that's real. That's my conditioning. So that's the conundrum that I've been wrestling with this week, along with Teresa. I'm definitely not saying that selfishness is good. Christ is colliding with selfishness in this parable, and we could all stand to be shaken up by that. But is there a way to avoid selfishness without condemning self? Because self is where I live. I can let Jesus take the wheel, but I've got my hands on it at least. I'm still in the vehicle. And then there's this whole other side of Jesus' message where myself, is good and sacred and loved. At what point does self-denial descend into self-abuse, self-hatred? How do we balance that? Not just intellectually, but in our living. Does that make sense? Collisions, disorientation, so much Lent. Let's get into the parable. Two main characters, a wealthy man and a beggar named Lazarus. Jesus calls out the wealthy man's clothing, a fine cloth of purple. Where are my purple people at today? I suspect this is a reference to the priests and the Pharisees, the religious leaders in the crowd who loved their purple. We do love a fancy costume. The name Lazarus means Creator helps him. The wealthy man lives in abundance. Clearly, he's helping himself. And Lazarus, Creator helps him because nobody else will. And so Lazarus positions himself at the gate of the rich man's mansion, just there begging for table scraps in the company of the dogs. For anyone paying attention in Jesus' audience, this setup is already a warning sign because people like Lazarus were meant to go to the temple for help. They were supposed to go there to see the priest, to be looked after with dignity and care. If this guy was reduced to begging at the gates of the wealthy, there's something wrong at the temple. There's something going on here. We're outside of what God had intended. So in the parable, Lazarus dies. And as his name implies, God does take care of him. In death, Lazarus is carried away to the bosom of Abraham. There's a whole lot of history with this description of the afterlife. Jewish ideas of Sheol, the place of shadows, are mixing together here with Greek ideas of Hades, the underworld, the unseeing place. And there's this vague tradition in the Jewish world about the bosom of Abraham. It's not heaven as we might imagine, but this is the bosom, this is the arms, this is the lap of the patriarch. It's a place of safety and belonging and rest and respect. It's very Jewish. It's kind of like the temple was meant to be for a guy like Lazarus. But the religious hadn't helped him, and so here in death, God helps him. Lazarus is in the good place with Abraham. Father of multitudes, Abraham's name means. And we contrast that with the rich man. He also dies, but he goes to Hades. That is a Greek word, a Greek concept. This Jewish guy is in the Greek world. He's on the outside. He's in the dark side, this place of fire and torment. And to me, the rich man seems genuinely surprised to be there. Like he can't quite grasp the role reversal. Mercy me, Abraham. There's been some kind of mistake. I'm not meant to suffer like this. Send a servant. Send Lazarus over here to ease my pain. But Abraham assures him that there's been no mistake. Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, whereas Lazarus received terrible things. Now Lazarus is being comforted and you are in great pain. Moreover, a great crevasse has been fixed between us and you. Those who wish to cross over from here to you cannot, neither can anyone cross from there to us. Again, the rich man just can't seem to believe this, but resigned to his fate, he begs Abraham to send Lazarus back to life, to warn the wealthy man's brothers so that they don't make the same mistake. But Abraham says, no, that's not necessary. This outcome was never hidden. This is the core of the law and the prophets. This is faithfulness 101. To love God is to love your neighbor. Jesus had confirmed that with these same religious leaders just a few chapters before, the Good Samaritan story and all that. You already know better, Jesus says. Now, as always, the question is, what are you going to do about it? And of course, this message isn't just aimed at the wealthy man or the religious leaders. Nobody helped Lazarus. You know how it is. We all would if we could. It's not my job. I have my own, you know that feeling. Who is going to help Lazarus? We've all seen him in our town, probably not that long ago. Does that make us selfish? Am I the rich man? Am I going to Hades? Yes and no and yes. First, the no. This parable is painful for me. I've got images like this one burned into my soul from years of evangelical altar calls when I was a kid. Choose now because you might die this very night. I don't want to offload too much of my spiritual trauma onto you. But I will say, if this is familiar, if you have heard this version of the story where this is a story about the great gulf fixed between God and sinners, if you're worried about being on the wrong side and being eternally separated from God, hear the words of Paul from Romans 8. I am convinced that nothing can separate us from God's love in Christ Jesus our Lord, not death or life, not angels or rulers, not present things or future things, not powers or height or depth or any other thing that is created. Nothing can separate us from God's love. This story does not undermine that truth. The division here isn't between us and God. This is a division between people. It's between the way things are and the way things are meant to be. Jesus isn't describing the afterlife that awaits us all. He's taking this popular imagination, this image that his audience already knew. They had this image in their head about the afterlife, and he's using what they know to make a point about this life now. Not to say that what happens after we die is unimportant, just to say that this parable is a metaphor. So if you didn't run off last week to help that poor shepherd and his lost sheep, well, then you shouldn't worry about a literal place of torment in this story either. There's lots more we could discuss there, and I would be happy to. But the point that Jesus is teaching is not about the afterlife at all, but the here and now. Jesus puts this key line in the story into the mouth of Abraham, the essence of Judaism. He is the father of nations, as the First Nations version translates. Father of many nations, Abraham said to him, "My son, do you not remember? All your days were filled with good things, but the days of Creator helps him, Lazarus, were filled with sorrow and pain. It is now his time for comfort, but it is your time for sorrow and pain." These days we might call that karma. What goes around comes around. We might even call that justice. There is a balancing of the scales here. The biblical Jews had that understanding of justice as well, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. To my understanding, though, there's always a sense of sorrow with that kind of justice in the Hebrew law. It's not the satisfaction of resolution, like, oh, now we're even and we have fixed that problem. It's more of a regrettable patch, like, this is the best that we can do for now. We have to balance the scales because we can't heal the eyes, we can't replace the teeth, so we have to just make things even and call it the best we can. But someday, the someday is shalom. Nothing missing, nothing broken. Harmony, unity, wholeness, completion, that is justice. Salvation, that is shalom. And there's another clue here that this is an illustration and not a revelation of eternity, because there is no shalom in this story, and the biblical vision of eternity is all about shalom. But in this vision, now with Lazarus now elevated while the rich man suffers, that's just a perpetuation of the problem. The bosom of Abraham, father of multitudes, that's supposed to be for everyone, but we're not there yet. This is not shalom. I love how the First Nations translation brings the climax into the present tense. Look, there is a great canyon between us, so wide that none can make the journey from here to there. And that's the problem. It's the canyon. The great gulf divides them, not just in death, but also in life. Jesus is holding up a mirror, reversing the roles to make the image more clear. But this gap between Lazarus and the wealthy man was already present. The root problem was not that one had wealth and the other did not. That was painful, yes, but for Lazarus anyway. But that separation was the symptom, not the cause. The cause was the separation itself. The cause was the gulf, the lack of shalom. Can you see how that changes the equation? The issue isn't that the rich man, the Pharisees, were selfish, bad people. It wasn't that they were unfaithful or corrupt in their religion. The Pharisees, they're kind of the villains in most of Jesus' stories, but actually they were as faithful as Jews could be. They were paragons of ancient Judaism. They were the shining examples of keeping the law. They honored the prophets in their own way. The problem that Jesus is pointing to is that their way, their practice of faith had separated them from people like Lazarus. They were faithful, but they were the only ones in the temple. They didn't have room there for Lazarus, and they were divided. They were set apart. They didn't even see Lazarus anymore. He didn't go to the temple because they had no room for him there. He's there at the gate, but they didn't see him. Their blindness had created the gulf, and that led to suffering rather than shalom. So the sin wasn't so much selfishness, but the resulting separation. That's how Richard Rohr describes it. The separate self is the major problem, not the shadow self, which only takes deeper forms of disguise. The shadow self is all the stuff that we associate with selfishness, the greed, envy, lust, all that stuff that comes with the 7 deadly sins. And we feel guilt and shame about that stuff. So we try to hide it from others, hide it from ourselves. We try to overcome the shadow. We try to discipline our way out of the shadow through self-denial, self-flagellation, self-help, self-reform. And we have varying degrees of success with that, but that shadow is always with us. We are not perfect. We are all self-centered because, again, self is where my center is. And so we might be able to grow into being less selfish over time. That's the goal. That's maturity. But we can't eliminate the shadow. And the deeper goal is to actually just make space for that shadow, to incorporate it, to allow ourselves to be human, to hold myself with the same grace that God does. And so the goal, the opposite of selfishness, is not self-denial, but actually connection. It's not self-sacrifice, making myself smaller, but it's actually just opening myself up to understanding myself as this part of a larger whole. So it's not Jesus, then others, then you, but it's Jesus and others and you, all moving together in right relationship. Right relationship, shalom. That is the vision. The wealthy man was out of step with shalom. He was disconnected. He couldn't even see Lazarus. He couldn't imagine his humanity. In this story, even after death, he's still treating Lazarus as a servant, not a relative. He's not entirely selfish. This guy cares about his brothers. He's just drawing his circle of family way too small. He can only see that he has 5 brothers, while Abraham is right there. He's the father of everyone. His wealth isn't the problem, not even the feasting and enjoying himself. The problem for this man is that the wealth and the pleasure have blinded him to the existence of Lazarus. It has kept him at arm's length rather than inviting him in and sharing life together. And as the parable makes clear, that separation creates suffering for Lazarus, and at the same time it creates suffering for the wealthy man. I've quoted this line before: until we all are all free, we are none of us free. From Jewish American poet Emma Lazarus. How's that for a coincidence? Until there is nothing, no one missing or broken, we don't have shalom, because we are all one. We are all cells in one body. I hope it's obvious just how countercultural that is these days. America first is being echoed by Canada first. We are circling the wagons. We are securing our borders, tightening our belts. International aid, well, that's a luxury we can't afford. We have to balance the budgets. We have to create jobs here at home. We have to strengthen our economy. We have to protect our independence and our sovereignty. Not picking on anyone's political party here. Everyone is singing some version of that song. And perhaps it makes sense politically and economically. That is beyond my field. But spiritually, and I believe everything is spiritual, that is the way of separation. That's the opposite of shalom. That is the path to destruction. Dare I say hell. Not because it's selfish, but because it ignores the reality that we are all connected, that my fate is inescapably bound up with the fate of friends and strangers, North and South, Ukrainians and Russians, prime ministers and people in poverty. And in times of stress, we close in, we lose sight of that. Pain and fear narrow our focus. That's unavoidable. I suspect that kind of restricted view is going to dominate our world for the foreseeable future. But we don't have to go along with that. We can force ourselves open. We can stay open, keep our eyes wide, keep our arms wide. Because within this new reality where everything's tightening up, there's also opportunities for openness. As you know, the government mantra right now is at all levels is fiscal responsibility. We're increasing efficiency, we're cutting spending and all of that. And that puts some of the services that we rely on at significant risk. Healthcare, housing, social safety nets, all that stuff it's more tenuous now than it ever has been. And I'm worried about that. And as governments are doing less, we, the people, have the opportunity to do more. Most of you know that a couple of months ago, our church got a call from Wildwood Elementary School, just across the park, 2 blocks that way. They have students and families that need food. Is there any way our church can join with other churches in the neighborhood in helping with that? That's amazing. I never would have imagined that phone call. In our model, that request is supposed to go up the chain. We're used to government funding to provide that basic support. And let me be clear, that is what I want and expect from my government. But if they're not going to do it, if they won't, then we turn to each other. Instead of going up, the school administration had to go out, and we've been invited in. So instead of this impersonal system, where I pay my taxes and they get kicked around in Regina for a while, and then eventually they get distributed by a government ministry. Instead of that indirect connection, now I get to make it personal. I can go directly to Lazarus in my neighborhood. I can shake their hand, I can give them something to eat, maybe I can even learn to eat with them. And we're responding to that, I'm glad to say. We've already pledged $1,000 to help provide food through Wildwood Elementary. Lizzie was there on Friday, I believe. So I expect we'll be hearing more about her meeting with the principal and where things are going there. But that opportunity didn't exist years ago. It does now. That is shalom. Neighbors working together directly, cultivating friendship. That is better for all of us, as long as I actually choose to do it. That's one of the side effects of present reality. Those of us with wealth and resources, we're being given the choice more directly. The government isn't going to force us to take care of each other anymore. We're going to have to do that for ourselves. What will we do with that opportunity? The government is not going to support people with addictions. It's up to us. The government is cutting international aid. It's up to us, and so on. How will we respond? Again, not because we feel guilty, not because we're trying to make ourselves small and deny ourselves, but because we are all connected. We are all God's children. We are all selfish, entirely human, and we are all Lazarus. God help us.